the mayor of Center Hastings, and Sterling Rodden, and a number of other people as well. And that is the leader of the official opposition. We're so happy to be joined by the leader of the New Democrats for the province of Ontario and the MPP for Davenport, Merritt Stiles. I really do appreciate your time getting an opportunity to join us. I'm going to disconnect this one thing. Hopefully that'll stop that dinging and we can get to a real conversation. So thank you for taking the time today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Tim, and to follow up on my visit to Tweed and Belleville and some of the surrounding area. It was a really special time and a pretty eye-opening visit, too.
It seemed to be quite a frank discussion that we had an opportunity to have with Don and kind of had our eyes open to some of what rural Ontario is dealing with. And as you had in the conversation with him, 52 bridges for 6,100 people. And I think he said somewhere in the neighborhood of about $130 million in infrastructure that needs to be addressed in the next 15 to 20 years. First of all, as far as your visits across rural Ontario and your opportunity to stop here, is this a unique message, or is this something that is being beaten all over the province?
Well, I would say it's something I'm hearing and seeing just about everywhere in every corner of the province, right? That crumbling infrastructure, but most importantly, the failure of the provincial government to help with any of it. Because, remember, this was all downloaded onto municipalities back in the 90s under Mike Harris, the previous Conservative premier. And nobody else has really dealt with it since then. And so what you're seeing in Tweed, and I think Tweed is a little unique, as you said, because you have a very small population. It is growing, but you have 52 bridges that are, many of which are hitting that 100-year mark. They're crumbling. I actually visited two bridges, the Ross Bridge and the Queensboro Bridge, when I was there, to see actually what they look like and why it's so necessary to replace them. But also, lots of roads and other infrastructure that really is far beyond the capacity and, frankly, the budget of a small municipality with such a small tax base. And so I hear this in varying degrees all over the province. And it's the infrastructure, but it's also things like public health. It's the crisis in addiction and mental health, and also homelessness that we're seeing in so many communities where, we may have had homelessness. It was kind of hidden away a little bit, but now it is just bubbled over. And so many communities, small, rural municipalities, bigger towns, rural, northern, everyone.
What is your thought on how much of this is to blame on the global pandemic? Is that an excuse, or does that become less and less relevant just with the costs that skyrocketed, particularly in infrastructure? I was talking to an individual in Trenton who was building a couple of new buildings, and he said just the price for an HVAC system, it didn't go up 20%, it went up 500%.
Right.
How much of this do we blame on politics or mismanagement in financial spending versus a pandemic, or is it a combination of a multiple set of factors?
I mean, I think you can certainly, point to the pandemic for some costs that went up, but costs they go up anyways, right? We do see this, costs do increase. And I think part of it is also just the sheer need, the population growth that hasn't been accompanied by investment to the same, level by the provincial government, which is where the money has to come from. And so, what you're seeing is, yes, costs have gone up, but also just need has gone up. And that's also driving cost up. So, everybody needs housing. So housing and the ability to build the housing and the cost of the supplies and labor have gone through the roof because every community is competing. And so that is partly the pandemic, but not only, absolutely. And I think, when you look at some of the other public health costs, certainly mental health, addiction, the stress, all of those issues, and the fact that people are really struggling to afford to get by at all. Some of that, it certainly peaked during the COVID pandemic. But, again, these things happen and governments have to be ready to respond. And our government has not responded adequately And it is literally those local communities, people, Ontario's people, are actually bearing the burden of it and the cost, because the cost gets passed down to them in property taxes.
I'd like to, it may be a simplistic question, but I think sometimes we get lost in, there's one taxpayer, but we pay taxes all the time. And sometimes I don't think we quite understand where our taxes go and who is responsible for what. So can you walk us through some of the things that the province is responsible for? Because I don't think people understand the relationship between municipalities and the province, where the federal government is somewhat different.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is confusing, right? It really is confusing. I always have to stop and think about it. But look, I would say, look at it this way. The province should be covering healthcare, education, infrastructure. These are big things. This is what the province covers. Now, what happened back in the 90s when Mike Harris was the premier is they sort of took a whole bunch of those things that really the province had been covering, and they started to download a lot of those things like supportive housing and stuff onto towns, cities, municipalities to cover. So now about a third of what Ontario's cities, towns, municipalities cover and spend money on is for services that really arguably are a provincial responsibility, like social housing and long-term care. Public health, which is healthcare. It could be things like vaccination programs, and it could be things like providing mental health and addiction community services. That's public healthcare, but it's healthcare, right? Childcare, and also other social services. Some of these things, it makes sense to have them administered in your community because local communities know local needs, right? But really, at the end of the day, it's that they're footing the bill, and the municipalities are actually having to go then to their residents to help pay for that as the need increases. And unfortunately, that means that things like other things like responsibilities that were also passed on to municipalities, road infrastructure, those bridges that we talked about, those are also things that municipalities weren't having to deal with before. And now those costs are astronomical on top of everything else. So, I think the other issue here is that municipalities, towns, rural municipalities, they're really what we call a creature of the provincial government, right? So the provincial government gets to put in place the laws that dictate what they have to handle and what they don't do, and what they have to pay for and what they can raise their taxes on. And so, again, they have all the responsibility for so many things, but very little control. And that's an important distinction for people to understand. Yeah.
The leader of the Ontario opposition of the NDP, Merritt Stiles, joins us here on the Lauren Brooker Show. We're happy to have her for the program. And I mean, I know I've got 9 hours worth of questions for you, so I'll try and tighten as much as possible.
Okay.
One of the things that Don DiGenova told me is he said, so I have a $5.5 million budget for my year. And he said of that, he has to pay roughly $800,000 to $900,000 back for previous infrastructure borrowing from the province. He says from there, he's got to deal with the staffing that he's got, and then he's got to deal with $15 to $20 million in infrastructure maintenance. Not necessarily new infrastructure, but just to maintain what he currently has. And the idea that he went up 17% over the last year, and that sounded astronomical till he told me how affordable it was in the past. When you're jumping into something like, you have your policing and your fire and EMS and all those other costs that go through the county, how is it even possible for a municipality to not just need maybe a third, the way funding sometimes did happen, but 80 or 90% support for these projects to even consider getting them off the ground?
Right. So, I think this is exactly where we're at. And I do want to say the reason I came to Tweed was because Mayor Don DiGenova came to this conference almost exactly a year ago of all the municipalities of Ontario. They have a big conference every year. And he came and he said, And I was just really struck by him, coming in alone. Oftentimes you get these big cities and they come in with these great big, groups of counselors and stuff. And here was Don by himself. And he was, the anger, the sadness, the desperation of what he felt, that's describing what you just described, like the impossibility of it. Like, I can't, and he said, my residents, the people in my community they're struggling to afford to, feed themselves often. And these are like folks who have jobs, middle-class people, but they can't afford to feed themselves. How can I make them pay for all of these additional things that we have to pay for? There's no choice. And the desperation he felt, I hear this a lot from people across the province, but I think that in the conversations that we often have, we miss out a little bit on like what the real toll is on people. And so how do we cover those things? I would say we can't not cover it. And that's, I think, the reality. You cannot go without those bridges, right? There are some bridges that maybe communities will have to close and just say, we're going to have to figure out a different way. And you're going to have to go a whole lot farther and take a different route. But there's also bridges you cannot close. There are roads that must be fixed because otherwise people will die. And there are services that have to be provided, or else our communities will continue to crumble and nobody will want to live there. And we won't be able to attract the doctors and the workers and, that we need. So we're in a crisis. I can't express it enough. We are in a crisis, and it is a crisis of neglect. And I put the responsibility at the provincial level. I think local town councillors and mayors really have been bearing this burden for far too long when the responsibility is with the province, and the province needs to step up.
We're going to continue our conversation with the leader of the Ontario New Democratic Party and the opposition leader at Queen's Park, Merritt Stiles. When we come back, the Lauren Brooker Show continues on CJBQ.
Elevate your home with the finest designs by Sky Kitchen and Flooring. Innovative cabinetry, exquisite countertops, premium floors for your bathroom, kitchen, and beyond. For flawless installs, premium supplies, and 3D designing, you need Sky Kitchen and Flooring.
For home renovation, there's only one to call who can build it all. From kitchens to bathrooms. From flooring and basement renos. To really bad jingles. Yeesh. Paulswalls.ca.
Cruise the Caribbean with Blows & Stewart Travel and 800 CJBQ. Hey, it's Lauren Brooker inviting you to our 2025 Caribbean cruise supporting the Belleville General Hospital Foundation. Join us for the adventure of a lifetime beginning February 27th. The experience begins with 2 nights at the beautiful Riverside Hotel in Fort Lauderdale. Then we step aboard the incredible Celebrity Apex for a 7-night cruise. We'll stop in the beautiful port of Key West, Florida, Bimini and Nassau in the Bahamas, and Puerto Plata in the Dominican Republic. The CJBQ Caribbean Cruise is more than the adventure of a lifetime. It's also a life-saving fundraiser supporting the Belleville General Hospital Foundation. Reserve your spot now and help keep exceptional care close to home. Space is limited. Call Blows & Stewart Travel today at 961-1186. That's 961-1186, and cruise the Caribbean with me this winter.
Bond Law. They're Quinty's local personal injury lawyers with more than 50 years of local success. Bond Law helps you never have to call them. But if you're ever injured due to a car crash, slip and fall, or any act of negligence, rest assured, Bond Law will support you in your time of need. Contact Bond Law for a free consultation. Visit bondlaw.ca. We're here when you need us most.
Bond Law, proudly serving our neighbors for over 50 years.
What do Dolly Parton, Cher, and CJBQ have in common? We were all born in 1946, and we think we've aged pretty darn well. You're listening to Quinty's Heritage Radio Station, 800 CJBQ.
Back on the Lauren Brooker Show, 800 CJBQ. My name is Tim Durkin in for Lauren today, and happy to be joined by Ontario's official opposition leader, the leader of the New Democratic Party, Merritt Stiles. She's an MPP for Davenport. And I don't know, there's the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. We're talking about the GTA, the Greater Tweed Area. I was looking up a little bit about your riding, Merritt, and the median income is actually not terribly different in your riding than it is for our area. And certainly The cost of living is expensive everywhere, but there's been some astronomical increases. When you're just talking to somebody that grabs you on the street or calls your constituency office, are you hearing the same 3 or 4 or 5 issues coming up time and time again?
Yeah, we are absolutely understaffed in healthcare. The healthcare crisis is it's a workforce challenge. It's a workforce issue. And it didn't just start under the pandemic, but certainly the way this government has kind of squeezed our healthcare workers. People are competing to find the best and the brightest healthcare workers to attract to their jurisdiction. We're way behind. We're driving them out. So we have to stop the bleed, first of all, to stop the bleed of nurses and other healthcare workers out of our hospitals and our system. And we also have to make work and life more attractive. And that means making sure people have, good, safe places to live and work and good wages. But the other thing I think we really have to do is we have to start making it easier for the people that we have here in the province of Ontario who are qualified to work in healthcare to get the go-ahead to do so, right? To be certified. I go to communities all the time. I was up in, I think it was Sault Ste. Marie, where they said, we have a really dire shortage of family doctors in primary care. They were on the verge. They just lost doctors for 10,000 people in Sault Ste. Marie just lost the doctors. And they had identified 80 internationally trained healthcare workers in their community that currently were not working in healthcare. There's no excuse for that anymore. We can get people working. We can ensure that they have the qualifications that they need. We can give them the experience on the job that they need here in Canada. But we've got to do it because it is leading us into a place where, again, healthcare is in a real crisis.
You were the opposition critic for education. It's been a while since the NDP oversaw education in this province. Is this been a failure of the system? Is it a failure of educators or parents or administrators, or is it death by 1,000 cuts that we're seeing in education, or are you happy with where education is?
Well, I mean, I will say I talk and I listen a lot to parents, people in the classrooms, educators, students too, administrators about the state of our schools. And I look at the research and how we're doing, how we're performing. And it's not good. It certainly is not. And I think, to be honest, that for a lot of families, you might not even realize how bad it is because those education workers, our teachers and educational assistants and everybody are doing their best to hold the system together, but it's held together by a thread. And the people who I know are seeing the most impact right now are definitely, people with kids who have special needs, people, kids who have to rely on buses, for example, to get to school because the bus systems are, deeply underfunded, and our school transportation systems it's a real crisis right now, and it will continue to get worse. But it's also all those other kids that get left out, right? Because we get teachers teaching classes that are getting bigger and bigger and with fewer supports. There are no mental health supports in our schools. There is no assessments are not happening at any decent rate. Our kids are falling through the cracks, and I think we're going to all pay for it down the road because education is absolutely critical to our economy, to our future. And so I'm very, very deeply concerned about it. And I would say, to your point, like, how did we get here? I think we got here over a couple of decades. I think it was both being conservative and liberal governments not addressing, how we need to fund education. Education right now is funded based on like a metric and a formula that is like the number of kids, the number of bums in seats, I would say. And what we need to do instead is start thinking about needs. What do we need? We're not helping anyone if we're not providing that kid who's struggling with support as early as we possibly can. Again, because as a society, we will pay that price down the road, right? We will pay those prices. We need to make sure that our kids get every support they need and are able to do the best they can as early as they can. And that is going to produce a better workforce, a healthier society, healthier communities. I know right now there's a lot of parents and grandparents feeling a deep desperation too, and teachers, education workers leaving the system because they're burned out, just like in healthcare. We don't hear as much about it, I would say, but I'm really worried about it, and I'm worried that the current government doesn't seem to have any interest in actually fixing the problem,
Leader of the official opposition at Queen's Park, Merritt Stiles, joins us here on the Lauren Brooker Show. My name is Tim Durkin. One of the shows I did a couple of months ago is I asked for educators to anonymously send me in information on what they've been dealing with in the classroom. And when so many of them were worried about speaking out for their job, and that's why we did it anonymously. But one of the things I was blown away at is the amount of teachers that have been harmed, they've been hit, spat upon, violence in the classroom. Is there something there in that component? Is it the punishment side of things? Is it the rehabilitation of students? What is the answer so that these educators do feel safe in the classroom?
Well, I've met with lots of educators and talked about this very issue. And I got to say, the first time I heard it, I was so shocked. And it was before the pandemic, actually. They were even then talking about it. It was, I think that violence in classrooms impacts teachers and other education workers in a really terrible way. It also means that kids are also hurting each other, which is also, of course, not good. And so, and it affects everyone. And I think that teachers that I talk to, they're not just worried about, themselves, but that, the trauma that kids live with in experiencing that all the time. And it's real. I think it's, again, something that sometimes we're shielded from as parents and outsiders. My kids aren't in school anymore. They're in their 20s. But, I would have been just horrified to hear that was happening in our classrooms. I think it's certainly gotten worse since the pandemic. I think a lot of kids who stayed at home, of course, didn't have a lot of the supports they needed, descended into depression, anxiety. I think a lot of this is based on mental health issues for a lot of our children. And I do think also there's an element of this that is, again, like, are we actually supporting, not just supporting teachers, but supporting families? Are we supporting families the right way? Are we providing the supports that new parents need to navigate some really complicated situations that we have to deal with as parents, right? Are we making sure that kids are getting assessed for any, challenges they may have early enough? We know that a lot of kids who are struggling already, they often express that in anger, right? Mm-hmm. They act out. And so, the teachers that I've talked to, what they want to see overwhelmingly, and they've asked for, is smaller class sizes, more support, more of those educational assistants who, we tend to think of those folks as people who are just there to help support kids with special needs. Even right now, they're supporting multiple children in one school. I've heard of large schools with only one educational assistant on board. This is a critical role, and we need more of them, not less. We need to really attract more of those supports into our schools to help right now. And I think I think what's really important to realize here is, these kids, if this is not addressed, we are going to pay a price down the road. There's no question. So I know teachers are really worried about this. They're trying to raise the alarm. The government has come through with zero response, zero supports. And it's just going to get worse before it gets better if we're not careful. Yeah.
There was a student that passed away in Trenton a couple of months ago that was in...
terrible.
It was in, I'm not sure if the right wording is a safe room, but a room that they were cared for in. One of the key components with a lot of what we're discussing here is the ability to attract people for this and bring them into it. How do we afford this when we're also on the other side of things dealing with what sounds like a financial crisis for all levels of government? There's so much that is needed, but that the dollars may not be there right now.
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say, this government is spending a lot of money actually. They're just spending it in all the wrong places. Doug Ford has the money to put, to foot a $800 million bill to subsidize a luxury spa in downtown Toronto that literally nobody asked for. It only seems to benefit some friends of his. He's got, $250 million, almost $250 million, possibly more than that he had handy to pay for the beer store contract to end just a year early. I mean, these are choices that are being made. These are choices. Money is leaving, and it's ending up increasingly in the pockets of private corporations. And we're not even seeing any kind of, competitive RFPs or anything going out for big contracts by government. This is waste. And it's about priorities. And so I don't think it's really an issue of do we have enough? The issue is where are your priorities, and are you willing to make those tough choices? And so I would argue that funding, again, properly funding education is important. Doug Ford made a really big mistake. And frankly, the predecessor of the new Minister of Education made a really big mistake when they decided to go after education workers and healthcare workers and try to freeze their wages in the middle of the pandemic. And what that did was it told a lot of people, particularly women, I mean, these are overwhelmingly women's occupations, that they weren't important and that the government didn't value them, that while they were calling them our heroes, they were willing to, while the cost of everything went up, freeze their wages. And, happily, that was overturned in the courts. But, that is one of the key reasons why we lost so many of those workers. So that should tell us all something. It should say that, you need to show at least some respect for those workers, basic respect, and frankly, start to treat those workers with the importance, like the respect they deserve. Childcare workers, some of the most underpaid workers in Canada and in Ontario particularly. And that's some of the most important work that, we do. We rely on it as parents, as working parents. We need really great people with, good qualifications to do those jobs. And then we pay them some of the lowest wages in the province. Like, we have to get our priorities straight, and we have to shift away from some of this waste and excess of this government into prioritizing what communities really need, or this crisis is going to get worse.
5 minutes left with the leader of the Ontario New Democrats and the official opposition leader at Queen's Park, Merritt Stiles. Again, 9 hours is needed. We've got 5 minutes, so I wanted to get to one of the other reasons for your stop, which was to meet in regards to the bridge, which is an integrated health services hub that the city of Belleville is pushing for. They wanted provincial federal funding. It looks like they're going to go it alone, at least for now. My question to you is, one of the things we've heard from Neil Ellis is he says this is a provincial issue. We're getting it downloaded onto us. What is your message to municipalities who I think a number came out today, something like 1,400 encampments in the province? This isn't a Belleville thing. This is an Ontario and perhaps a national, international crisis right now.
Well, my message would be this, that you got a government that's taking you for granted right now. They say the right things when they show up in town for a press conference or some big opening, and then they leave with all their money with them, and they don't come through. And that's the story in Belleville, and that's the story I hear over and over and over again. Ontarians deserve better than this. Our communities deserve better than this. That story really gets me angry, actually, because I see it. I've seen it in Belleville, and I've seen it in communities across this province where we are experiencing that homelessness and mental health and addiction crisis right out in front in encampments and our streets. And, really, this is an emergency that requires urgent efforts by government. And what I see over and over again is municipalities desperately asking for help and then getting nothing or just peanuts. You deserve better than this. We deserve better than this, and I am going to be calling for a new deal for municipalities so that government for the province starts to pay more, at least its fair share. We need some bold solutions that'll get things back in order, and it has to happen fast. And we cannot rely on the private sector to do everything. It's just not working. A lot of this is about homes and housing. People are losing their homes, and then they're ending up on the streets, and they're already dealing with mental health issues or addiction issues. We need housing now, and the only way we're going to do that is if government comes together and actually works with communities to build housing that is affordable, that is supportive, and that gets people both off the streets, but also ensures people don't lose their homes in the first place.
3 minutes left. One of the things Mayor DeGenova said was perhaps our area needs to be a swing riding. Talk about in the 2 minutes we have the complexity of how money gets doled out federally and provincially when one party says they don't have a chance of winning, so they're not going to invest, and the other party says, well, we have it locked up, so we're not even going to bother. Does that happen? Do you see that?
Oh yeah, I certainly see it. I see the government looking at communities and making decisions based on the fact that look, there's communities and ridings in your area which have been conservative for a long time. And I see it. I see the government taking those communities for granted. I see it all the time. And I've certainly heard it from your mayors and your wardens and your city councilors, right? This is, they should be delivering funding and support, and it's not coming through. And it doesn't matter how long and hard they scream about it. So I would just go back to saying, we can't, this kind of politics needs to be a thing of the past. Right? We need to start actually put in place a system where we are delivering the supports that communities need when they need it, identified by local governments who will say, you know what, they know where the need is. Municipalities have made these assessments long ago. They just haven't had a real partner in government. And that's what they need. Not, and so I appreciate what Mayor DeGenova is saying. What he's saying is, we need to turn up the heat on this government so they don't take us for granted anymore. And I think that's true. I always say to people out there, in the last few elections, we've seen really low voter turnout. People aren't coming out to vote. And I've thought a lot about that, of course, as a politician, as somebody who thinks that government can actually, should and can do good things. And I think it's because people have lost confidence that any party or any government is actually going to be able to do anything to change things for the better for their lives. And I hope to change that. I really want people to know that a lot of what's happening right now, it doesn't need to be this way. A lot of this is about choices. Government out in BC, there's an NDP government out in BC right now that is turning things around in healthcare and in housing, leading the pack because they're making decisions that are prioritizing people, not big companies and, the friends of the premier. And that's what we need to do here. We need to stop this kind of games playing and this pork barrel politics and actually start to serve people and communities. And it can be done. It can be done. So send your government a message, right? In this next election, which could happen this fall even, they're going to try to steal 2 more years from the people of Ontario. Well, I say bring it on. Let's get a change happening. Let's elect some new Democrats maybe in ridings like this, where you can actually stop this kind of politicking and make things a lot better for people.
We have 10 seconds left, so that was the perfect time to finish this, the entire hour with the leader of the Ontario New Democrats, Merritt Stiles. We thank you so much for taking the time here on the Lauren Brooker Show.
Well, thanks so much, Tim.
Mom just wanted